This week's Grimm Fairytales. We got a classic here. Sleeping Beauty. A long time ago, there was a king and queen who said every day, if only we had a child. But they never had one. But it happened that once when the queen was bathing, a frog crept out of the water onto the land and said to her, "Your wish shall be fulfilled. Before a year has gone by, you shall have a daughter." What the frog had said came true, and the queen had a little girl who was so pretty that the king could not contain himself for joy, and ordered a great feast. He invited not only his kindred, friends, and acquaintances, but also the wise women, in order that they might be kind and well disposed towards the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but as he had only 12 golden plates for them to eat out of, one of them had to be left at home. The feast was held with all manner of splendor, and when it came to an end, the wise women bestowed their magic gifts upon the baby. One gave virtue, another beauty, a third riches, and so on, with everything in the world that one can wish for. When 11 of them had made their promises, suddenly the 13th came in. She wished to avenge herself for not having been invited, and without greeting, or even looking at anyone, she cried with a loud voice, "The king's daughter shall in her 15th year prick herself with a spindle and fall down dead." And without saying a word more, she turned around and left the room. They were all shocked. But the 12th, whose good wish still remained unspoken, came forward, and as she could not undo the evil sentence, but only soften it, she said, "It shall not be death, but a deep sleep of 100 years into which the princess shall fall." The king, who would fain keep his dear child from the misfortune, gave orders that every spindle in the whole kingdom should be burnt. Meanwhile, the gift of the wise women were plenteously fulfilled on the young girl, for she was so beautiful, modest, good-natured, and wise, that everyone who saw her was bound to love her. It happened that on the very day when she was 15 years old, the king and queen were not at home, and the maiden was left in the palace quite alone. So she went round into all sorts of places, looked into rooms and bedchambers just as she liked, and at last came to an old tower. She climbed up the narrow winding staircase and reached a little door. A rusty key was in the lock, and when she turned the door, sprang open, and there in a little room sat an old woman with a spindle, busily spinning her flax. "Good day, old dame," said the king's daughter. "What are you doing here?" "I am spinning," said the old woman, and nodded her head. "What sort of thing is that rattles round so merrily?" said the girl, and she took the spindle and wanted to spin too, but scarcely had she touched the spindle when the magic decree was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger with it. And in the very moment when she felt the prick, she fell down upon the bed that stood there and lay in a deep sleep. And this sleep extended over the whole palace. The king and queen, who had just come home and had entered the great hall, began to go to sleep, and the whole of the court with them. The horses, too, went to sleep in the stable, and the dogs in the yard, the pigeons upon the roof, the flies on the wall. Even the fire that was flaming on the hearth became quiet and slept, the roast meat left off frizzling, and the cook, who was just going to pull the hair of the scullery boy because he had forgotten something, let him go and went to sleep. And the wind fell, and on the trees before the castle not a leaf moved again. But round about the castle there began to grow a hedge of thorns, which every year became higher, and at last grew close up round the castle and all over it, so that there was nothing of it to be seen, not even the flag upon the roof, but the story of the beautiful sleeping Briar Rose, for so the princess was named, went about the country, so that from time to time kings' sons came and tried to get through the thorny hedge into the castle. But they found it impossible, for the thorns held fast together as if they had hands, and the youths were caught in them, could not get loose again, and died a miserable death. After long, long years, a king's son came again to the country, and heard an old man talking about the thorn hedge, and that a castle was said to stand behind it in which a wonderfully beautiful princess named Briar Rose had been asleep for 100 years, and that the king and queen and the whole court were asleep likewise. He had heard too from his grandfather that many kings' sons had already come and had tried to get through the thorny hedge, but they had remained sticking fast in it and had died a pitiful death. Then the youth said, "I am not afraid. I will go and see the beautiful Briar Rose." The good old man might dissuade him as he would. He did not listen to his words. But by this time the 100 years had just passed, and the day had come when Briar Rose was to awake again. When the king's son came near to the thorn hedge, it was nothing but large and beautiful flowers, which parted from each other of their own accord, and let him pass unhurt. Then they closed again behind him, like a hedge. In the castle yard he saw the horses and spotted hounds lying asleep. On the roof sat the pigeons with their heads under their wings. And when he entered the house, the flies were asleep upon the wall. The cook in the kitchen was still holding out his hand to seize the boy, and the maid was sitting by the black hen which she was going to pluck. He went on farther, and in the great hall he saw the whole of the court lying asleep, and up by the throne lay the king and queen. Then he went on still farther, and all was so quiet that a breath could be heard, and at last he came to the tower and opened the door into the little room where Briar Rose was sleeping. There she lay, so beautiful that he could not turn his eyes away, and he stooped down and gave her a kiss. But as soon as he kissed her, Briar Rose opened her eyes and awoke, and looked at him quite sweetly. Then they went down together, and the king awoke, and the queen, and the whole court, and looked at each other in great astonishment, and the horses in the courtyard stood up and shook themselves. The hounds jumped and wagged their tails. The pigeons on the roof pulled out their heads from under their wings, looked round and flew into the open country. The flies on the wall crept again. The fire in the kitchen burned up and flickered and cooked the meat. The joint began to turn and fizzle again. And the cook gave the boy such a box on the ear that he screamed, and the maid plucked the fowl ready for the spit. And then the marriage of the king's son and Briar Rose was celebrated with all splendor, and they lived contented to the end of their days. Frau Trude. There was once a little girl who was obstinate and inquisitive, and when her parents told her to do anything, she did not obey them. So how could she fare well? One day she said to her parents, "I have heard so much of Frau Trude, I will go to her some day. People say that everything about her does look so strange, and that there are such odd things in her house that I have become quite curious." Her parents absolutely forbade her and said, "Frau Trude is a bad woman, and does wicked things, and if thou goest to her, thou art no longer our child." But the maiden did not let herself be turned aside by her parents' prohibition, and still went to Frau Trude. And when she got to her, Frau Trude said, "Why art thou so pale?" "Ah," she replied, and her whole body trembled. "I have been so terrified at what I have seen." "What hast thou seen?" "I saw a black man on your steps. That was a collier. Then I saw a green man. That was a huntsman. After that I saw a blood-red man. That was a butcher. Ah, Frau Trude, I was terrified. I looked through the window and saw not you, but, as I verily believe, the devil himself with a head of fire. Oh, said she, then thou hast seen the witch in her proper costume. I have been waiting for thee and wanting thee a long time already. Thou shalt give me some light. Then she changed the girl into a block of wood and threw it into the fire. And when it was in full blaze, she sat down close to it, warmed herself by it, and said, That shines bright for once in a way. The Devil's Sooty Brother. A disbanded soldier had nothing to live on, and he did not know how to get on. So he went out into the forest, and when he walked for a short time, he met a little man who was, however, the devil. The little man said to him, What ails you? You seem so very sorrowful. Then the soldier said, I am hungry, but have no money. The devil said, If you will hire yourself to me and be my serving man, you shall have enough for all your life. You shall serve me for 7 years, and after that you shall again be free. But one thing I must tell you, and that is, you must not wash, comb, or trim yourself, or cut your hair or nails, or wipe the water from your eyes. The soldier said, All right, if there is no help for it, and went off with the little man, who straightway led him down into hell. Then he told him what he had to do. He was to poke the fire under the kettles wherein the hell broth was stewing, keep the house clean, drive all the sweepings behind the doors, and see that everything was in order. But if he once peeped into the kettles, it would go ill with him. The soldier said, Good, I will take care. And then the old devil went out again on his wanderings, and the soldier entered upon his new duties, made the fire and swept the dirt well behind the doors, just as he had been bidden. When the old devil came back again, he looked to see if all had been done, appeared satisfied, and went forth a second time. The soldier now took a good look on every side. The kettles were standing all round hell with a mighty fire below them, and inside they were boiling and sputtering. He would have given anything to look inside them, if the devil had not so particularly forbidden him. At last, he could no longer restrain himself, slightly raised the lid of the first kettle, and peeped in, and there he saw his former corporal shut in. Aha, old bird, said he, do I meet you here? You once had me in your power, now I have you. And he quickly let the lid fall, poked the fire, and added a fresh log. After that, he went to the second kettle, raised its lid also a little, and peeped in. His former ensign was in that. Aha, old bird, so I find you here. You once had me in your power, now I have you. He closed the lid again and fetched yet another log to make it really hot. Then he wanted to see who might be sitting up in the third kettle. It was actually a general. Aha, old bird, do I meet you here? Once you had me in your power, now I have you. And he fetched the bellows and made hell fire blaze right under him. So he did his work 7 years in hell, did not wash, comb, or trim himself, or cut his hair or nails, or wash the water out of his eyes. And the 7 years seemed so short to him that he thought he had only been half a year. Now when the time had fully gone by, the devil came and said, Well, Hans, what have you done? I poked the fire under the kettles, and I have swept all the dirt behind the doors. But you have peeped into the kettles as well. It is lucky for you that you added fresh logs to them, or else your life would have been forfeited. Now that your time is up, you will go home again." "Yes," said the soldier. "I should very much like to see what my father is doing at home." The devil said, "In order that you may receive the wages you have earned, go and fill your knapsack full of sweepings, and take it home with you. You must also go unwashed and uncombed, with long hair on your head and beard, and with uncut nails and dim eyes. And when you are asked whence you came, you must say, 'From hell.' And when you are asked who you are to say, 'The devil's Sooty brother, and my king as well.'" The soldier held his peace and did as the devil bade him. But he was not at all satisfied with his wages. Then, as soon as he was up in the forest again, he took his knapsack from his back to empty it. But on opening it, the sweepings had become pure gold. "I should have never expected that," said he, and was well pleased and entered the town. The landlord was standing in front of the inn, and when he saw the soldier approaching, he was terrified because Hans looked so horrible, worse than a scarecrow. He called to him and asked, "Whence comest thou?" "From hell." "Who art thou?" "The devil's Sooty brother, and my king as well." Then the host would not let him enter. But when Hans showed him the gold, he came and unlatched the door himself. Hans then ordered the best room and attendants, ate and drank his fill, but neither washed nor combed himself as the devil had bidden him, and at last lay down to sleep. But the knapsack full of gold remained before the eyes of the landlord, and left him no peace during the night. He crept in and stole it away. Next morning, however, when Hans got up and wanted to pay the landlord and travel further, behold, his knapsack was gone. But he soon composed himself and thought, "Thou hast been unfortunate from no fault of thine own," and straightway went back again to hell, complained of his misfortune to the old devil, and begged for his help. The devil said, "Seat yourself. I will wash, comb, and trim you, cut your hair and nails, and wash your eyes for you." And when he had done with him, he had gave him the knapsack back again full of sweepings, and said, "Go and tell the landlord that he must return you your money, or else I will come and fetch him, and he shall poke the fire in your place." Hans went up and said this to the landlord, "Thou hast stolen my money. If thou dost not return it, thou shalt go down to hell in my place, and will look as horrible as I." Then the landlord gave him the money, and more besides, only begging him to keep it secret, and Hans was now a rich man. He set out on his way home to his father, bought himself a shabby smock frock to wear, and strolled about making music, for he had learned to do that while he was with the devil in hell. There was, however, an old king in that country, before whom he had to play, and the king was so delighted with his playing that he promised him his eldest daughter in marriage. But when she heard that she was to be married to a common fellow in a smock frock, she said, "Rather than do that, I would go into the deepest water." Then the king gave him the youngest, who was quite willing to do it to please her father, and thus the devil's Sooty brother got the king's daughter, and when the aged king died, the whole kingdom likewise. Bearskin. There was once a young fellow who enlisted as a soldier, conducted himself bravely, and was always the foremost when it rained bullets. So long as the war lasted, all went well. But when peace was made, he received his dismissal, and the captain said he might go where he liked. His parents were dead, and he no longer had a home. So he went to his brothers and begged them to take him in, and keep him until war broke out again. The brothers, however, were hard-hearted and said, "What can we do with thee? Thou art of no use to us. Go and make a living for thyself." The soldier had nothing left but his gun. He took that on his shoulder and went forth into the world. He came to a wide heath, on which nothing was to be seen but a circle of trees. Under these he sat sorrowfully down and began to think over his fate. "I have no money," thought he. "I have learnt no trade but that of fighting, and now that they have made peace, they don't want me any longer. So I see beforehand that I shall have to starve." All at once he heard a rustling, and when he looked round, a strange man stood before him, who wore a green coat and looked right stately, but had a hideous cloven foot. "I know already what thou art in need of," said the man. "Gold and possessions thou shalt have. As much as thou canst make away with, do what thou wilt. But first I must know if thou art fearless, that I may not bestow my money in vain." "A soldier in fear, how can those two things go together?" he answered. "Thou canst put me to the proof." "Very well then," answered the man. "Look behind thee." The soldier turned round and saw a large bear, which came growling towards him. "Oh-ho!" cried the soldier. "I will tickle thy nose for thee, so that thou shalt soon lose thy fancy for growling." And he aimed at the bear and shot it through the muzzle. It fell down and never stirred again. "I see quite well," said the stranger, "that thou art not wanting in courage, but there is still another condition which thou wilt have to fulfill." "If it does not endanger my salvation," replied the soldier, who knew very well who was standing by him. "If it does, I'll have nothing to do with it." "Thou wilt look to that for thyself," answered the green coat. "Thou shalt for the next 7 years neither wash thyself, nor comb thy beard, nor thy hair, nor cut thy nails, nor say one paternoster. I will give thee a coat and a cloak, which during this time thou must wear. If thou diest during these 7 years, thou art mine. If thou remainest alive, thou art free, and rich to boot, for all the rest of thy life." The soldier thought of the great extremity in which he now found himself, and as he had so often had gone to meet death, he resolved to risk it now also, and agreed to the terms. The devil took off his green coat, gave it to the soldier, and said, "If thou hast this coat on thy back, and puttest thy hand into the pocket, thou wilt always find it full of money." Then he pulled the skin off the bear, and said, "This shall be thy cloak, and thy bed also, for thereon shalt thou sleep, and in no other bed shalt thou lie, and because of this apparel thou shalt be called Bearskin." After this, the devil vanished. The soldier put the coat on, felt at once in his pocket, and found that the thing was really true. Then he put on the bearskin and went forth into the world, and enjoyed himself, refraining from nothing that did him good and his money harm. During the first year his appearance was passable, but during the second he began to look like a monster. His hair covered nearly the whole of his face. His beard was like a piece of coarse felt. His fingers had claws, and his face was so covered with dirt that if cress had been sown on it, it would have come up. Whosoever saw him ran away. But as he everywhere gave the poor money to pray that he might not die during the 7 years, and as he paid well for everything, he still always found shelter. In the 4th year, he entered an inn where the landlord would not receive him, and would not even let him have a place in the stable, because he was afraid the horses would be scared. But as Bearskin thrust his hand into his pocket and pulled out a handful of ducats, the host let himself be persuaded and gave him a room in an outhouse. Bearskin was, however, obliged to promise not to let himself be seen, lest the inn should get a bad name. As Bearskin was sitting alone in the evening, and wishing from the bottom of his heart that the 7 years were over, he heard a loud lamenting in a neighboring room. He had a compassionate heart, so he opened the door, and saw an old man weeping bitterly and wringing his hands. Bearskin went nearer, but the man sprang to his feet and tried to escape from him. At last, when the man perceived that Bearskin's voice was human, he let himself be prevailed on, and by kind words, Bearskin succeeded so far that the old man revealed the cause of his grief. His property had dwindled away by degrees. He and his daughters would have to starve, and he was so poor that he could not pay the innkeeper and was to be put in prison. "If that is your only trouble," said Bearskin, "I have plenty of money." He caused the innkeeper to be brought thither and paid him, and put purse full of gold into the poor old man's pocket besides. When the old man saw himself set free from all his troubles, he did not know how to be grateful enough. "Come with me," said he to Bearskin. "My daughters are all miracles of beauty. Choose one of them for thyself as a wife. When she hears what thou hast done for me, she will not refuse thee. Thou dost in truth look a little strange, but she will soon put thee to rights again." This pleased Bearskin well, and he went. When the eldest saw him, she was so terribly alarmed at his face that she screamed and ran away. The second stood still and looked at him from head to foot, but then she said, "How can I accept a husband who no longer has a human form? The shaven bear that once was here and passed itself off for a man pleased me far better, for at any rate it wore a hussar's dress and white gloves. If it were nothing but ugliness, I might get used to that." The youngest, however, said, "Dear father, that must be a good man to have helped you out of your trouble. So if you have promised him a bride for doing it, your promise must be kept." It was a pity that Bearskin's face was covered with dirt and with hair, for if not, they might have seen how delighted he was when he heard these words. He took a ring from his finger, broke it in two, and gave her one half, and the other he kept for himself. He wrote his name, however, on her half, and hers on his, and begged her to keep her peace carefully, and then he took his leave and said, "I must still wander about for 3 years, and if I do not return then, thou art free, for I shall be dead, but pray to God to preserve my life." The poor betrothed bride dressed herself entirely in black, and when she thought of her future bridegroom, tears came into her eyes. Nothing but contempt and mockery fell to her lot from her sisters. "Take care," said the eldest. "If thou givest him thy hand, he will strike his claws into it." "Beware," said the second. "Bears like sweet things, and if he takes a fancy to thee, he will eat thee up." "Thou must always do as he likes," began the elder again, "or else he will growl." And the second continued, "But the wedding will be a merry one, for bears dance well." The bride was silent and did not let them vex her. Bearskin, however, traveled about the world from one place to another, did good where he was able, and gave generously to the poor, that they might pray for him. At length, as the last day of the 7 years dawned, he went once more out onto the heath, and seated himself beneath the circle of trees. It was not long before the wind whistled, and the devil stood before him, and looked angrily at him. Then he threw Bearskin his old coat and asked for his own green one back. "We have not got so far as that yet," answered Bearskin. "Thou must first make me clean." Whether the devil liked it or not, he was forced to fetch water and wash Bearskin, comb his hair and cut his nails. After this, he looked like a brave soldier and was much handsomer than he had ever been before. When the devil had gone away, Bearskin was quite light-hearted. He went into the town, put on a magnificent velvet coat, seated himself in a carriage drawn by 4 white horses, and drove to his bride's house. No one recognized him. The father took him for a distinguished general, and led him into the room where his daughters were sitting. He was forced to place himself between the two eldest. They helped him to wine, gave him the best pieces of meat, and thought that in all the world they had never seen a handsomer man. The bride, however, sat opposite to him in her black dress, and never raised her eyes nor spoke a word. When at length he asked the father if he would give him one of his daughters to wife, the two eldest jumped up, ran into their bedrooms to put on splendid dresses, for each of them fancied she was the chosen one. The stranger, as soon as he was alone with his bride, brought out his half of the ring and threw it in a glass of wine which he reached across the table to her. She took the wine, but when she had drunk it and found the half ring lying at the bottom, her heart began to beat. She got the other half, which she wore on a ribbon round her neck, joined them, and saw that the two pieces fitted exactly together. Then said he, "I am thy betrothed bridegroom, whom thou sawest as Bearskin. But through God's grace I have again received my human form, and have once more become clean." He went up to her, embraced her, and gave her a kiss. In the meantime, the two sisters came back in full dress, and when they saw that the handsome man had fallen to the share of the youngest, and heard that he was Bearskin, they ran out full of anger and rage. One of them drowned herself in the well, the other hanged herself on a tree. In the evening, someone knocked at the door, and when the bridegroom opened it, it was the devil in his green coat, who said, "Seest thou, I have now got two souls in the place of thy one."